think, John, you want to get started?
Yeah, whenever you're ready, Eric.
Yeah, I guess I'm moderating, so I guess I got to make the choice here. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for the FME and Transportation SIG. Glad to have everyone here. It sounds like we have a really good audience. A count of looks like 24 right now, which is great. So today, let me see if this screen will move forward. All right, let's go over the agenda here. Group background and purpose. I don't have the group background and purpose in front of me. John, do you have that in front of you, or do I need to read anything, or should I just ad lib on what the background and purpose is?
It's actually on the next slide.
Oh, well, look at that. See, good thing I proofed these slides ahead of time. Background and purpose, right? Created by GISTIC and GeoDecisions, and also Safe Software is a partner in this. You know, they are really supporting what we're doing with this FME and transportation. I know GISTIC and GeoDecisions both really believe that FME is a valuable tool, especially in the transportation side of things. And I know I really feel it's underutilized, and it can really help DOTs become more efficient. In this group, you know, community involvement. So we rely on you people that are here today and others to volunteer for presentations. The last thing you want to do is see myself. And we could see Connecticut every time, but you don't want to see myself or Bo or Bo's team always doing the presentation. So if you have a presentation that you'd like to show, it's really easy. Just let us know and we'll get taken care of. And again, other goal is crowdsourcing the knowledge and resources to better the GIS and transportation community. All right, let's see what we got here. So we got speaker introductions. Is it Ryan? Is it Lyding or
Lighting? You got it.
Lyding. All right, Ryan Lyding. I'm going to mess all these other ones up coming up here. Ryan, as you see, there's going to discuss how you utilize FME for his business process. His favorite transformer is attribute manager, and least favorite food is shellfish. Really?
Yeah.
You don't like shellfish, huh?
I like
okay.
I like other seafood, but just not shellfish.
Okay. Well, there you go. So, do you like steak?
Oh yeah.
That's not shellfish, but yeah. Okay. All
good.
right.
no surf and turf for Ryan though.
No surf and turf, right? Just the turf. Yeah. And next we have is it Mitch or Mitchell?
Either one's fine.
All right. Well, Mitch, is it Gugliotti? Gugliotti. Did I get
Yes,
that?
sir.
Gugliotti? All right.
Yep.
And he's going to show us how Connecticut utilizes FME to synchronize data between existing products, crash data, especially. So that'll be a really good one. Attribute manager again. And what's the deal with shellfish? Don't you guys have like access to the ocean?
Oh, it's actually cauliflower.
I think it was cauliflower.
Yeah, I enjoy shellfish.
Oh, wait. So we have a wrong food on here.
That was my bad.
Okay. Well, there we go. I missed the meeting last time. John didn't get the least favorite food in there. So cauliflower, huh? So, well, if you ever come out to Iowa, we'll get you some cauliflower and we'll get you some AE party dip with that. So people in Iowa know what that is. So, and Greg, we don't have a slide for Greg. Greg, you're going to be presenting too, right?
I'm going to do an introduction. I'm just going to intro Mitch and Ryan and give it a little background on what we've done. But Mitch and Ryan are the rock stars of this, to be honest.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Greg. Before I turn it over, though, I just want to say the title of this presentation was awesome. So Zero to FME. I don't know who came up with that, but they should get a big prize for that title. So Greg, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and if you want to introduce the rest of your team and take it away.
Sure. So let me find the right screen here. I think I want screen 2. Let me know when you guys can see it.
I'm not seeing it yet. Do I have to, let me stop sharing.
Oops, hold on. Let me hit share. It was showing which one, and then there we go. Now we seeing it?
Yeah, there we go. Yep.
There we go. So I have to give a lot of credit to John. We had 0 to 60, how we did it quickly. He came up with 0 to FME. Great job on the title, John. Before we start too, I want to kind of reach out and just thank Eric in general. FME, and as you're going to kind of find out through the presentation, FME is relatively new to DOT on an enterprise effort. We've had a license for a few years that kind of sat up in engineering. They were using it for things here or there, kind of identified needs, one-off type stuff. But based on Eric's time with Iowa DOT, some of the feedback we gathered from some of the peer exchanges, just kind of proving how valuable those are. And then additionally, Eric actually came up and did an on-site with us, really helped us to explore what the possibilities were with FME. And also, and not for nothing, this is a big deal with this, right? Eric came up and really made our IT personnel more comfortable with what we were planning to do with FME. And what's come out of that is we've been really able to make some really great strides, both with data integration in general, and that's where Ryan will kind of talk a little bit about, but also in the development of our enterprise GIS. So I do want to give a little bit of project background so you guys kind of understand terms and things like that that we're talking about. And based on the title with the authoritative data and enterprise GIS. Let me go, I'm in the wrong thing here. Hold on. All right. So if I click next, so we have a TED at Connecticut DOT. It's our enterprise database, the Transportation Enterprise Database. It's kind of a data warehouse. And then as most data warehouses go, we have a whole bunch of data kind of coming from around the agency, whether it's from our Highway Operations Bureau, our Public Transportation Bureau, Engineering Construction, Planning, safety data, which is managed a little bit differently, some of our finance data, and then obviously our field maintenance staff. So you're seeing a lot of listings there of different types of data, whether it's LRS events, Meyer attribution for the roadway, AADTs, the crashes, some of our off-road network stuff like the CT Fast Track or our rail networks. All this stuff has historically been maintained kind of in databases that were disparate. There were silos everywhere. So we wanted to kind of utilize the GIS, the enterprise GIS that we were building as our central repository for all of this data. You can kind of see the vision that we had for TED when we started conceptualizing it up there. We really wanted to be able to allow people to continue to work in the applications that they were comfortable with. We didn't want to rebuild every single process around the DOT. We just really wanted to be able to get access to the data. And that's where FME has become really, really powerful for us. So here's kind of the architecture of what TED looks like right now. You can see a lot of lines going a lot of places, a lot of databases, a lot of interactions, server installs, everything else. What ultimately this graphic is kind of showing is that it's a complex integration of systems and databases. We're utilizing the Esri stack to provide both our internal and our external access to this geospatial data and non-geospatial data for that respect as well. And we're meeting a variety of needs, right? Whether it's data editing, data integration coming from external data sets, visualization, querying, and analysis. That's really what we're hoping TED will be able to do. And so far, we think we've been relatively successful. That big, huge graphic, what it kind of boils down to, what we're doing is we have multiple production transactional databases where transactional ARC SDE databases that are organized by bureau. From there, we're publishing editable services, and then people can go in and edit them through web applications or whatever else, or even bring them into external applications that IT has developed or some of our consultants. That all those transactions, that everyday business happens down at those production transactional databases, and then we have a replication script that kind of pushes it up to our data mart, which is the authoritative vetted QA data that we're able to push out to the public or use in our decision making. We're also pushing that out to ArcGIS Online through open data and collaboration so that we can provide access to the public. That big graphic just ends up being, we can manage it here, it goes here for everyone to use, and then we can push it out to some of our external partners as well. So what's FME's role in all of this? For Connecticut DOT, we've been using it to integrate some of our systems of record, whether that is taking data from those systems, it's non-geospatial, and writing it directly into our data mart and doing joins up there so that they can match the feature, or pulling some of that data into those transactionals so that we can do additional work on that data, or value-added attribution or joins and whatever else is kind of needed. So we're allowing those authoritative systems to still exist, and we're utilizing FME to kind of integrate them into our enterprise GIS. We're also doing data processing and transformation. Ryan and Mitch are going to talk about that. We're integrating applications of business workflows. With this Esri stack, we've been trying to push it and kind of maybe using it for not some of the intended purposes based on how we're using collector, survey 1, 2, 3, workforce, and some of the other data collection applications. Ryan and Mitch have done a really good job of finding ways to integrate across and meet some of the identified business workflows that we have. We're also facilitating the utilization of the LRS. That's not necessarily something we're going to cover today, but it is something that we're using the nearest neighbor and LRS IDs and attribute joiner to kind of bring these other assets from outside of our system and be able to get them a location on the LRS, regardless of where they kind of fall in space. It is a critical component of some report generation. Ryan might touch on that a little bit at the end of his presentation. And then ultimately what we're doing is we're utilizing FME and FME server to put the power and data control in the hands of the stewards. So rather than having to call up IT and do some of the stuff, we're creating applications that are allowing the personnel to determine what their workflows would be. So products and databases, this is just a real quick graphic of kind of what we're using here. So obviously the Esri stack and a lot of the collection tools that are out there, whether it's Survey 123 Collector or Workforce. We're a Bentley shop, so we do have InspecTech and AssetWise AWLRS, formerly known as Exor, and we use Bentley MicroStation. There's a lot of different types of databases we're using as well, SQL databases, Oracle databases, and then unfortunately there's still a few Access databases that we're kind of integrating into this entire system. And then we have field collection tools that are kind of disparate that we've worked to develop on our own with some of our consultants like Maverick. So we're utilizing FME to kind of, we're injecting it into each one of these processes to make them more efficient and to make it where data is flowing to the right place at the right time for the right people to be able to use it. So Ryan's going to go through and show you a little bit about our customer care center. This was kind of in the write-up. What we had previously was what you're seeing on the left there. It just said DOT. It was basically a web form that generated an email that eventually got passed around the agency until it found the right person, right? There was some lookup lists on this related to this where different topics would go to different people. But as someone who would get some of these occasionally, the lag time between them could be days or weeks, depending on when the person reported it. And it also wasn't really easy to use, like you had to know where to get it on the web page. So what we're doing instead is we've worked with UConn and VHB, and this is actually UConn and VHB kind of led this project to develop a solution within Esri, where there's now an embedded Survey 123 form that allows us to gather some location data. Also allows the user to enter phone or enter how the call came in, right? The web form was strictly email. Now we can start logging every single call that comes in, whether it's from the phone, email, a letter, whatever it ends up being. And every one of these requests that come into the DOT kind of gets logged. Instead of relying on people to describe where it is, we now have a map component as well. And then we're able to kind of track locations of some of these issues that come in. The primary Esri components are Survey 123 and Workforce, but Ryan will go into and show you how we're using FME to kind of meet this relatively unique workflow to make sure that one, the data gets to the person who can actually address the issue, and then two, we're making sure that everyone's kind of alerted when one of these calls come in and we can track the progress throughout the entire cycle. One of the things that we're excited about is by having this in Workforce, we're going to start being able to monitor when these issues come in, when they get closed, what are our response times, are we seeing recurring issues at the same locations, that kind of stuff. Whereas before, when it was just generating an email, we did not have that ability whatsoever. So there's also, as a component of this, again, this is the UConn component. Ryan kind of interjected FME into it, but there is a web application that they're using to interact with the issues. They can reassign them, they can close them, whatever else. And we have a dashboard to kind of monitor it. This type of vision into issues that came into ConDOT was never something we've had before. It was strictly just emails and whether or not they found the right person eventually. The other thing Ryan's going to talk about is the Highway Safety Office. So this is not necessarily a TED-related effort, but this is how we're using kind of some of the products that we have available to us to meet identified workflows specifically for planning. We're a little selfish. We sit in planning. We're not in IT. So this kind of request came through, and Ryan was able to meet it utilizing some relatively unique features of FME. So it was previously an entirely paper form that was written out and signed. He's now utilized Operations Dashboard and Survey 123 and FME to take that paper process, still support it, because there's still kind of a culture change that needs to take place at ConDOT where we get away from paper reports. But Ryan's done a great job of supporting that moving forward. And then we're also utilizing it to kind of meet this approval process, providing continued access to the same record as it makes its way through. I know there's some limitations with Survey 123 where resubmitting surveys and having them be in the outbox or the sent folders and on the same device. Like Ryan's been able to use the web interface, FME, embedded URLs, passing information back and forth so that the same record can be reviewed, resubmitted, and then goes on to the next part of the approval process. And then lastly, Mitch is going to go through the crash data processing and synchronization that we've got. So we have three real important components of the crash data. There's the enterprise GIS, which is the new part and why we got tasked with this. There was an existing legacy system called CAS2, and then there's also the crash data repository that sits up at UConn. It's really, really important for Connecticut DOT to have these three databases in sync. And what Mitch is going to kind of walk us through is there's two main components here. There was a lot of editing that takes place at different points in this process, and he's done a really good job of using FME to accommodate that. And then additionally, there is a PII redaction script that needs to run in the middle of this process so that we're not accidentally exposing any personal identifiable information, either to internal staff where it's not appropriate or even to our external stakeholders. So with that, Ryan, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, bud, if you want to steal the screen.
Yep, I'm going to try to share here. All right, you should see FME desktop.
Which one are we doing first, Ryan? The customer care?
Yeah, it's the customer care center. So we're gonna go over that first.
Okay.
Actually, I could pull open the. So this is basically what the public sees in terms of when they're submitting something into the customer care center. So it's a survey 123, as Greg was saying earlier. It's pretty basic information, and then this gets passed off to the actual customer care center, and then they set the status to assigned, which is where the FME part comes in. So the way this workflow works, it's using the AGOL online feature reader. So it's actually pulling in the data from Workforce, and it checks the status. So it's checking to see if it's assigned, an assigned status, and making sure that an email hasn't been sent already. So one of the things they wanted with this is they still wanted to send out emails for this process. So that's not something that Workforce really facilitates. So that's why we've built this FME process to do that. So what this does is it's going to pull in the assignments. It's going to pull in your assignment types. So basically the type of issue that's associated with the survey 123 submission. It also supports attachments. So one of the things we have to do with attachments is the way AGOL stores attachments. It stores it as a binary. So you have to kind of convert that binary into a file that can be used as an attachment for an email. So in FME, you can do that. Basically, you read that binary as a roster, and then you write it as a roster as a temporary JPEG or PNG file. And then you can write that file essentially as an attachment to the email. The other thing that this does is, well, how do you know who to contact based on where you are in the state? So we created a matrix essentially of all the towns. Some of the towns have multiple pieces depending on which maintenance garage or personnel cover that area. So it's basically a matrix of emails associated with the type of claim that comes in. So this is a way for them to kind of maintain, who gets emailed based on a certain issue that comes across.
So it's based on the issue and its location, right, Ryan?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So what happens is the assignment comes in. The assignment obviously is a point feature based on the location they select, and we use the point on area overlayer. So basically, if the point falls within that polygon, it pulls the attribution from the assignment that's coming in, and then it also pulls in the email information associated with that location that's selected. So that way the email knows who it's going to send the email to. So once you have that information, there's a little bit of transposing you have to do, because as you can see here, kind of the way that the data is lined up here, basically have to turn this into one record per assignment. So there's some transposing you can do within the attribute manager. So if we look in here, basically you can see each of the assignment types has a unique global ID, and then we can assign the grouping of emails that's associated with that issue that comes across. And then once you have that data, the email is sent out, and I can just show you the email real quick. So this is kind of basically what the email looks like. It just uses HTML. It's using the emailer transformer that's available in FME, and that has various settings in terms of like what do you want to, how many are the attachments you put on there, and you can use HTML formatting for the email. So this is just a test entry I did earlier. And from here, the other thing we add to the email is a link to the actual location of the issue. So if you click this, it should load up where this was selected on the map. I believe, yeah, I'm just zooming in here. It's trying to load. Give it a second. So here it is here. And then from here, once the assignment is completed, they can go in here, open the smart editor, and they can set this status to completed, give a reason when it was closed. And they save that, and then that assignment is now completed. So it's kind of a way for them to go in here and basically use Workforce, but not necessarily use the Workforce app, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a way for them to, still close an event without having to use the Workforce app, which is one of the things they wanted.
Well, one of the issues we had, Ryan, is that workforce itself, I believe, is not available. It's only the worst workforce dispatch field crew is only available as iOS or an Android, right? And we are a Windows tablet shop,
Windows, yeah.
right? So we needed to
there's
use
issues
the
there.
Yep. So we needed to use the web viewer. And this is where we think FME offers us a lot of opportunity, right? Like we're able to create things like this that get around some of the platform issues that we have, or just availability, licensing, that kind of stuff. So,
Yep. So basically the last step of this is it basically creates a flag saying, okay, the email was sent, and then it just updates an attribute in that, that feature service on AGOL, and it updates that to just say, hey, the email's been sent. So that way it doesn't, keep sending an email 1,000 times over. And then what we do is this workspace is actually published up on FME servers. So I'm going to go up there real quick, and it uses an automation type workflow. So it's just a scheduled, basically it checks every 5 minutes to see if there's any new submissions to the system. So it just uses a basic scheduler, and it repeats every 5 minutes. And then it runs that workflow I just showed you. So that's basically just an automation. It's saying, okay, every 5 minutes, I'm going to run that workflow.
we don't quite have 11 engines like Iowa used to. So we're trying to be judicious with how we use them. So setting the scheduled every 5 minutes and not constantly listening was kind of the middle ground we settled on.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to switch over to, that's pretty much it for the customer care workflow. I'm going to go over and switch to the highway safety and show that off a bit. So this is the dashboard I created. Basically, just a quick overview on this. They have a grant program with PDs, so police departments. So things like DUI checkpoints and things like that. And they have to complete a form to kind of evaluate how the PDs are doing. As Greg said earlier, the whole process was basically just paper previously. So what I did was I created a survey 123 for their form of entry, and I kind of tried to consolidate everything into a dashboard. One thing different with this one is it doesn't have any emailing or anything like that. And one of my things is I like to try to get away from sending emails. So some people like that as a way of checking for updates and stuff, but I feel like dashboards are a better way of kind of monitoring that kind of thing. So you kind of just go in and check this dashboard for updates. So as you add new things in, they'll show up here. So I'll just show you the form real quick, what that looks like. So just from the dashboard, you get a link to create a new form. That opens up here as a blank form. One of the requirements that they wanted was they wanted to be able to pre-fill out the form and then be able to have multiple people go in and make edits. So to do that, what I did was I leveraged the ability to pass parameters into the survey 123 URL. So if we go to edit this form here, say we want to edit or update this form, you can see it's pulling in the data from somebody, or pulling in the previous data that was entered. And the way it does that is if you look up here in the URL, you can see it's pulling in the survey based on the global ID of that survey. So it's basically leveraging these URL parameters to pull in the information that was previously filled out in that survey. So a person can go in here and add another person here, another name or any of this stuff, and then hit submit again, and it will update. And then you could go back to the dashboard, and the next person would be able to open and edit it and see that updated data. One of the other requirements they also wanted to be able to download a physical copy. I know we're trying to get away from the world of paper, but unfortunately, certain offices still require, paper and PDFs and things like that. And unfortunately, that's the reality of some things, but FME has some options for that. So I also had an option to download the form. So I basically created a Word document export that they can use to view those specific records. And again, this is updated, which I'll show you in a second how that works, but this is updated based on those changes that are submitted with the survey through the edits. So it's pretty basic. It's just some tables that show the responses within that form. And I think the ultimate goal is they're going to be sharing this or saving this on SharePoint. And eventually I'm going to build that into the workflow to have the file automatically share or save the SharePoint. But currently we're waiting on our IT to allow that.
Yep.
interaction, but that is something that will be done in the future with this. All right, so I'm going to kind of show you the actual workflows behind that stuff. I
Ryan,
guess
there was a question in the chat about webhooks. I think it was related
yeah, I
to
was
the
just
last one too.
yeah, I was just
Sorry.
about to talk about webhooks with
Sure.
this. So this with the way this one works is that this survey leverages a webhook on FME server. So if we go back over to FME server here, this uses a webhook, so it's right here. It's another automation. So one of the triggers for an automation is a webhook. So what you would do is you take this URL here that's provided in FME, and you go to your survey 123 when you're setting it up, and there's an option to connect it to a webhook. So you would paste this URL in there, and then anytime there's any modification or updates to that survey, it will trigger this webhook. And I'm about to show you the workflow that's associated with that webhook here. So go over here. So basically the information coming from survey 123 is passed in as a parameter. So to do that, it's traditionally you would have like a reader in an FME workflow, but in this case we just use a creator. That way it just basically gives it a starting point. So once it's triggered, it's going to go through. It's going to use the parameter fetcher. So like I said, the information coming from that survey 123 is written as a parameter in FME, and then we can turn that parameter into an attribute. We then take that attribute and we use a JSON fragmenter to break that out. So we get all the attributes we want. So I just have a listing of all the attributes I want to expose for this particular webhook. And what that does is that will turn, basically your JSON information coming from the webhook, you'll turn it into an attribute that you can use. So that gets passed along. In this case, they didn't necessarily need geometry, but because I had to create a feature service for that dashboard, I basically created geometry. And if I ever wanted to add geolocation in the future, that would be an option. This basically just creates a point feature just so it has some geometry in there. So it works. And then there's just some data management type stuff. So one of the things, so if I go back to here real quick, switch back here. So if I go back to the dashboard, so basically what I do in the attribute manager is I have to generate these two URLs. So you have the URL that allows you to edit the form, and then also the URL that allows you to download the form. So I basically handle that in an attribute manager here. And if we scroll down, open the wrong one. So we scroll down here, you can see I just have the URL, it's building. So this is the survey, this is all static, but you can see here I'm pulling in the global ID as a value. So, this will update based on the survey that's submitted. It'll write that to that particular attribute. And it's a similar thing with the download. So the download is also going to use the global ID of that particular record. And I'll kind of explain this a little bit more in a second, but this is using another type of webhook associated with another workflow that generates the actual report form. So again, that's somewhat of a static URL, but the thing that changes is the global ID parameter for that. I guess another thing to note, if you're working with survey 123, if you have date and time values, they come in as epoch time, but they use epoch time with milliseconds. So in FME, epoch time is read in seconds. So I had to go and divide all those values by 1,000. It took me a while to figure that one out. So just a little tip to remember that. So basically, it writes those two URLs as attributes. That stuff is passed along. And then what the end here is this is writing to our SDE database as a point feature in there. One thing it does do before that is it actually reads the current SDE layer in there and it checks for changes. So I have the change detector here. So basically, if it's a completely new record, it's going to be an insert. If it's an update of an existing one, it's going to make an update to that. So that way the data that's associated in that table is updated. That way when you go to download the form, that data is updated here. So it's just basically all it's doing here is it's just reading in the table I'm writing to ahead of time, and it just checks for any changes. In this case, it would only be an update or an insert. And then based on that, it'll update the SDE table that I have associated. And then that SDE table is associated with a feature service, which is linked to this dashboard. So I'm gonna kind of show the form download part. So to get the form download part to work, what I did was there's actually another workflow that creates that Microsoft Word report. So if I go to here, so basically the way it's set up is that you can have webhooks associated with workspaces hosted up on FME server. So that particular report, if you go into your settings here and you go to advanced, you go down here, you can create a webhook. So what I did is I basically created a webhook for this particular workflow that is creating that report. And you can also pass in parameters through that webhook. So what I'm doing is I'm passing in that global ID as a parameter, which then brings us to the actual report or the workflow that generates the report. So it's going to read that table that has the data in it, the SDE table, but it's only going to read ones where the parameter matches the global ID of the record you're trying to pull in. So it's only going to download the form of the matching global ID. To build out the reports, it's somewhat complicated. Like this has 73 transformers in it, which sounds like a lot, but a lot of it's just kind of copy and pasting and repetitive. Basically each of these levels is kind of each of these blocks. You can kind of think of it. It's like each of these is a table. And trying to get the table to be horizontal versus vertical takes a little bit of work in terms of which transformers you're using and stuff. But it's kind of just pretty straightforward. You use this MS Word styler, and that kind of allows you to pull in. So in this case, I'm using it as a content type table, and it's just pulling in values. And basically it will create this part here and input that information based on the matching global ID of that particular record. And like I said, a lot of this is just copy and paste. So like if you were to look at these, they're all very similar what they're doing, kind of leveraging that word styler. Some of these have a little extra things. Like I said, if you wanted the table to kind of be vertical versus horizontal, kind of where you want the attributes to show up, you can kind of transpose some of the data through using attribute managers and different things there. And then basically what happens from there, there's just a little sorting that has to be done. So making sure that all these pieces come in the correct order. So that way you don't wind up with, this piece above that piece. So you kind of just give everything like a count or like a sequence, and then you can sort that. And it's based on basically the first thing that comes across is going to be the first thing that it writes into the document. So this is just using a Microsoft Word writer. It writes it in. And then the last step to this is we publish this up. And again, that's that workflow I was showing you up here. You publish it up as a data streaming service. You could also do a data downloading service as well. And the last step again is you would create that webhook, and basically every time the user goes in and clicks on form download, it's going to run that workflow that generates that report, and it's going to download that file for that person, and you get the printout report, and it'll update based on those changes that are made to the survey that are submitted.
So it's a really nice, and like we've run into that, and I know other DOTs do too, right? Like whether you're spending credits, and we've had some of our users come in, and every time there's an inspection, they want the new inspection report, and obviously Survey 123 supports that, right? They've got the feature reports. This and that actually has a little bit more functionality. You can customize the look and feel a little bit more, but this is a nice alternative that Ryan has kind of developed here that doesn't end up consuming credits in ArcGIS Online. So.
Yeah, and this feature here is fairly new, I believe. Previously, you could always do this if you were working within the app, right? But then they added it to the web version of Survey 123, which really opens up access to anyone. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, this is shared with a small group of people. But the nice thing about Esri is you can kind of control who sees what, so you can whether you're sharing this with the public or with a group set up on Portal or AGOL, it's possible to do. And I guess So that's pretty much with that. I'm just going to show one more thing here, just kind of another style of report. One of the other cool things we've been doing is using FME apps. FME apps are really simple to set up. Basically, you could just go over to show some of the apps we have. So we got quite a few set up right now, but they're fairly easy to configure and set up. And basically, these apps are associated with workspaces that you publish up onto FME server. So we're just going to go in here and just look at one, so you can kind of see here. These are the parameters. So you can have all sorts of parameters that you want to set into your works, based on your workspace that you publish up. And you can kind of do some basic, headers and styles here, which is kind of cool. So what I've been doing with that is I kind of set up this. This is an example used for roadway inventory reporting portal. So they're one of the units that kind of still has a need for having paper reports and PDF type reports. And a lot of the reports like combine multiple assets and things like that across all their data sets. So what I did was I created, basically created FME apps for them to run their reports. So like a limited access report here, they can go in and set the date of, basically they have snapshot dates. So obviously their data is yearly because of HPMS. So if they want to look at 2019's data, they would put that data in. I'm not going to run this right now because it takes a minute, but I also added in the ability to basically, they have two different environments. They have a production and QA, which that is working through leveraging versioning within the SD database. So you can open up. So basically, this is just an example of what the report would look like after it runs. This is again is using a workspace that was uploaded to FME server using the data streaming option. And you can see it kind of just gives you an HTML report. So this is an example of an HTML report versus a Microsoft Word report. So this is just kind of another option. One of the things I did is I tried to make it print friendly as best as possible. So if I just go to hit print real quick, you can see it breaks on the limited access code. So instead of it kind of cutting off, so it redoes the table headings and things like that. So it's somewhat, I mean, it's not as perfect as like a traditional PDF report, but at least gives you something that you could export out as a PDF or print. And I could just kind of show that workflow real quick, and then I'm going to pass it off to Mitch because I'm taking too much time here. But this is just kind of an example of how you can use the HTML report generator, which is probably the simplest. It's a lot, as you can see, it's a lot less transformers than that Microsoft Word one. This is only 30 transformers versus 70. And a lot of the transformers are just kind of getting the data to look a certain way to to have the report present. So if we just open up the HTML report generator real quick, it's pretty cool. There's a way to have custom HTML. So I have a little bit of custom HTML here that basically sets up the page break. So I have basically a variable here that sets up the page break. And then from there, it's anytime this limited access code. So you use this group by, which those of you who are familiar with FME, you can use group by to kind of break things out into pieces. So anytime the limited access code changes, it's going to create a new page. And then from there, you kind of can use these headers and tables and things. So it's pretty intuitive to set this stuff up, and you get a nice, pretty simple HTML report, and it works really great on the web. And then you can also make it work to print the PDF or print if need be. But that's all I got. So I'm gonna pass it off. Thank you.
It's a change in mindset for us, but Ryan's done a great job of continuing to support. Like, and it even goes to the section that Ryan and I originally came from. Like, everyone likes having that thing that they can see, that digital copy, that report that they've seen for 20 years. As we're pushing people towards this kind of more enterprise approach, we're trying to get them into the dashboard realm, that, like Ryan was saying, but he's done a great job of continuing to support creation of some of these, or mimicking some of the previous reports that have existed for years. And to be fair to them, many of those are mandated. They're mandated either by state statute or federal requirements. Yeah. And Ryan's done a great job of making sure that we're able to continue to do that as we push people towards this enterprise geospatial environment. So great job, Ryan.
Yeah. And then I guess one last thing. One of the other things is we also, Greg was talking about how the LRS, but our LRS is held in an Oracle database. So I created kind of an app for them to basically, okay, we're ready to load, functional class from the Oracle database into the SDE. So it's kind of just user-friendly, forward-facing app that allows them to say, okay, these are the assets we want to load in. These are the snapshot data associated with those. They just press OK, it runs, it updates the SDE, and they don't have to worry about going through and running the workflow, or it just makes it a lot more user-friendly.
Yep. Tough act to follow, Mitch. We're going to talk about some crash data.
Yeah.
That's
My
exciting.
stuff,
That's the exciting stuff.
I don't think so. I think your stuff is much more exciting, Ryan. Much more complex too. My stuff only sounds complex. You'll see in a minute. So the crash data repository in CAS2, and crash data synchronization between the 3 databases. So as Greg stated earlier, currently all of our crash data editing is taking place here at DOT in a database that we call CAS2. So what is CAS2? CAS2 is a database comprised of 13 main tables. The primary table here is crash. This is a primary table that contains a primary key that allows all the other tables to join to this main table, creating one really large data set with hundreds of fields collecting all sorts of information. So after all the tables are joined, we have to migrate all of this data from CAS2 into the data mart, where our partners up at UConn grab the data and bring it over into their database, which is the CDR, the crash data repository. Up at the CDR, they're exposing it for public consumption. Down in data mart here at DOT, we disseminate it to the agency, and CAS2 is kind of our working transactional database.
So Mitch, before you go on, something I think is important just to give some context here. We are a 100% electronic crash reporting state. So there's 7 different vendors throughout the state who are providing the crash data through an electronic form. I think there's nightly ETLs, and then we have a crash data coding section that goes in and makes sure that they're all digitized. They're running some QA at that point, and that's what Mitch is talking about when he's talking about CAS2. It's that process of getting it from the electronic submission into the database itself.
Yes, and they use a custom-built application that's built by IT to manage all that data and make edits to it and synchronize it.
Exactly, and we didn't want to change that process at all. We just wanted access to the data, and that's where Mitch comes in.
So how does the FME workflow work? It's much easier than it really sounds. We pretty much query the source database, throw in an attribute manager to reconcile the schemas, and then we use a feature writer to write the data to the target database. Everything's the same for 12 tables until we get down to crash. Once we get to crash, there's one field in there, the main field that contains PII sensitive information, that has to be redacted. So what we do is we feed all the data one row at a time through a Python caller that calls a Python script that tokenizes and breaks up the sentences of the narrative, which is paragraphs long. And it tries to extract all personal noun or proper nouns or sensitive data out of that, whether it be names, social security numbers, phone numbers, addresses,
yep,
insurance information, plate numbers. And those are pretty much the big stuff. It's very sensitive. It over redacts instead of under redacts. So there is a lot of stuff that doesn't make too much sense in there. That does get replaced, but better to be safe than sorry. So how does the redaction script work? The main 2 libraries that it uses for natural language processing is NLTK, the Natural Language Toolkit, and also the Stanford Core NLP package. I can't talk too much exactly how the script works. It was developed by our partner at UConn. I kind of just reconfigured it to work in FME. So I took the main portion of the script, brought it into the Python caller, and was able to run it as a function. But the main nuts and bolts behind it is that it pulls in these sentences, breaks everything out by sentences, and then it performs what's called a tokenize. That's taking each individual word and looking at it and trying to match it to a part of speech. From there, it goes through and kind of looks at words around it. So you have a proper noun next to like an adjective or something else. So it tries to really dial in and find things around it to help identify what those proper nouns or names might actually be. So I guess we can go into the workflow. It looks a little bit more complex when you're at the 5,000 level foot view here. But when we zoom in, kind of starting with the first table, all 12 tables are kind of the same. Like I said, we query the source using either SQL Creator or SQL Executor. To start it off, we use SQL Creator. Once we get down the chain a little bit, we pop into SQL Executors. This allows us to kind of take it one table at a time, so we can move the data one piece at a time and not have to worry about moving everything all at once and then edits taking place and just breaking the entire workflow and process. So the most interesting part is all the way down here at the end when we get to the crash table. So we take our SQL executor and we query the source crash table, change the schema around to match the target database, and then we kind of send it through this Python caller. So what this Python caller does is goes through row by row and pulls out the crash ID and the narrative. The crash ID is the primary key that I was talking about that allows us to join all the tables together. It pulls out this narrative and sends it through our script, brings it back, and gives us a nice filtered narrative to look at. From there, we're able to write it out as a feature class into one of our SDE tables, and then also into our SQL side of the data mart or SDE databases. So yeah, that's pretty much the crash synchronization in a nutshell.
So Mitch, do you want to talk about how, like, when we first looked at this project and it seems like a simple ETL and running of a process, right? But then we heard from them that there's kind of some complex editing, right? CAS2, the database, Yukon was making edits to some of those locations of the crashes as well, right? And so you're running a recognition on anytime any of those change in that process, right?
Yeah, across all 13 tables, anything that changes in those 13 tables will get picked up as like an update or an insert and brought along the process into and synced with the other two databases.
Yeah, when we
they
first
do
started,
try to keep it to the most recent year or two for editing, but they've noticed that there has been some problem with spatially locating some of the data. So they have been going through and cleaning that up in the past, which has made it especially difficult to perform the initial migration. We have about 5 years of data, and I've been moving it in about 6 month blocks, and it takes about 10 to 15 hours to run for our initial load, mainly because of the redaction script. It's performing a pretty heavy process, so it does take some time to run. But in that 10, 15 hours, things can change quite substantially too, which can really cause some big headaches and conflicts when you're trying to synchronize 3 databases with such large amounts of data.
Yep. And it's made it where this process and then clearly identifying, and I think through the discovery with this, we were able to talk to some of the stewards, and even they were learning things about when data is getting changed and who's changing it. And so we do partner with Yukon, and Yukon students are doing some of this work, and God bless them. Some of them are working at 2 a.m. Like, who knows what time? They're not normal business hours, right, Mitch? So it's become a relatively labor-intensive project to make sure that this stuff is all kind of synchronized across. I think you've done a great job to accommodate a lot of the different steps in the process.
Yeah, pretty much it's turned into synchronized 3 databases that can constantly be changing, and FMEs made it very simple.
Yep. Oh, and by the way, throw in this redaction script.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's what we've got. I guess open it up for any questions. I know we took a little longer, but anything you guys want to ask? I guess Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, this is great. So we got Question here from Chris, just came in. Was there evaluation of the cost of developing these applications in FME versus conventional code-based solutions? That's a really good question.
So there wasn't a formal evaluation. I'll say that as far as the cost of developing them FME. What we found is once we kind of were able to sit down, and Eric, you were a part of this, when we sat down with our IT and we showed them what we're able to do, for they're strapped as it is. I don't know about you guys, but our DOT IT, I don't think that necessarily the DOT has the perspective of them being, we see it all over the place, right? There's a underinvestment, I think, in IT in general around for state agencies, right? So when they saw this and saw that it would allow us to kind of take control over some of the stuff, allow the users to develop some of this stuff, as opposed to having to continually go to them, especially with every single little change, they were all for it, and it did kind of open up the possibilities and give us some control over it. That being said, particularly with the crash data migration, that discussion did happen. Do we want to try to develop this using some of the normal IT practices? What came back was, we have this, what they're calling the silver tsunami, coming up in less than a year, or about a year, where there's a change in the contract for all of Connecticut state employees, and there's an expectation to 30 to 35% of the staff are going to leave. So it became, well, if it's in FME, that's a little bit more intuitive. We're not really at the beck and call of what the IT staff can come in and kind of get accommodated to. The transformers are kind of, it's a really good way to be able to tell really quickly what's going on and make adjustments. So the sustainability came in as well. And that's another reason why they kind of agreed to utilizing Mitch and Ryan for these types of processes.
The other thing is that it's not necessarily one or the other. It's just another tool in the toolbox. You know, FME does things really quickly and easily, but other things are not so easy. So we do still write custom Python scripts and other code-based solutions to satisfy some of the things that we do need done.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we definitely still work with, consultants in our IT. I mean, it's not gonna solve 100% of everything, but it definitely helps streamline things.
Yeah, and I like the tool, you mentioned tool in the toolbox, right? If you only have one screwdriver, it's hard to work with different types of screws, right? And having those there, you can pick the right tool for the right job. And FME will fill that sometimes, and other times, it's custom development, things like that. So we still have about 5 minutes left. If there's anyone else that has a question, feel free to unmute yourself too, and turn your camera on, right? Bo did. And we want to see who you are and ask your question.
I have some comments. I think CTDOT did excellent job. And the takeaway is, don't treat FME as a platform. It is not. It's a tool. And I know many agencies, they are concerned about bringing another system, another platform, because in all the DOTs, we do not lack systems and platforms. We have too many of them. But what makes FME unique, it is a Swiss Army knife. In this particular case, it demonstrated, really, it is the connector. It's the glue. It's making anything that has a kink or has something difficult to do, making things easier. I think that's really illustrated. In a sense, it's similar to what Utah DOT has been doing. I think just about a couple of months ago, Adrian and Sarah from Utah DOT did a demonstration on that, more or less considering this tool to connecting to making your existing system better. So I think that approach is very important. It is kind of different from my understanding of how Iowa DOT is using it. It's also different from what we've been doing, especially at ADA, using this a really heavy lifting traditional ETL, doing QA/QC. But I think UConn's the Connecticut DOT's efforts really illustrate what FME does best. Small, agile code or workspace and glue everything together, making things better. One other comment I have is, it seemed to me the Python redaction code is really pretty heavy to do. It may be possible you can keep that separate as a process to, let's say, overnight, regular basis, or even in a more scheduled basis, create separate database. So in your FME process, in that location, you can simply just read the pre-cooked, adapted data. So making your process a little more agile in that sense. You separate two concerns, separation of concerns. So that would be a little better architecture from my perspective.
Always good words of wisdom from Bo, right? Thanks, Bo, for that. So I'm not seeing any additional questions here. So I think we're about ready to wrap up. We got the wrap up screen. I think everyone can see that. And thanks, Connecticut DOT. Like echo what Bo said, this great presentation. I thought well done. It was amazing to see how far. When was I out at Connecticut? Was it 2019, 2018, something like that?
You were one of the ones that helped us actually get the licensing. So yeah, it was I think it was like spring of 2019.
Okay, yeah. So amazing, just in a couple years, how far you've come with this, and it's been a great presentation. Coming up next month, we'll have Adam Tyra from Indiana. And what's Adam going to talk about next month? John, do you have that?
I don't have it directly in front of me, but essentially he has a process where he was trying to do a bunch of stuff with LRS measures. And one of the issues that we ran into, I think Bo can touch more on, he worked with Dave Campanis from Safe Software to work through that issue. So Bo, if you want to talk about that really quickly, you might have more information than I do.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot. And I think what we are trying to do is, again, linking multiple databases together, but more in an ETL perspective, do geocoding, reverse geocoding, because they have bridge, MBI system, linking with the database system, how they do LRS-based geocoding and reverse geocoding. And I think it is different from what Connecticut DOT's work. It's more focusing on a little bit pretty detailed, specific workflow. So that's my gut feel, and we are yet to receive his proposal in a couple of weeks for sure. Yeah.
So anyway, we got Indiana next month, and if you do want to have a desire or have some cool things to show, let John know. John's email's there, and we'll get you on the schedule. It's pretty easy to do. We don't want to make it hard for people to present. You just show the stuff you have, and even if you only have 15 minutes of presentation, that's all you need, right? So again, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for being here. So, all right, and this video will be made available here shortly, probably in the next week or so you can share it with your friends. Anyway, thanks everyone.
Thank you.